A cattle-baron widower posted for a cook, but a single mom holding a newborn walked into his life instead. The clang of a tin plate against the floor was followed by the scrape of chairs and muttered curses. "Damn it, Thorne, even the coyotes would spit out this stew," growled Wade Kellerman, one of the older ranch hands. His wiry frame leaned over the long table as he pointed at the slop in his bowl with exaggerated disgust. "It tastes like someone boiled a boot with onions." Laughter rippled down the mess hall, but it was brittle, strained from the long days under the sun and the endless monotony of dust and disappointment. Another man, younger, slammed a dented pot down onto the table with a metallic thud. "We work 14 hours a day, and this is what we get fed?" In the silence that followed, boots clicked on the floorboards as Thorne McCrae stepped into the room. Broad-shouldered, sun-weathered, and cut from the same harsh land he ruled, he paused only a second before replying, his voice low and steady. "Anyone thinks they can do better," he said. "The kitchen's open. Go on. Impress us." Nobody moved. His gaze swept over the men like a chill wind across the prairie. Then, "Shut up and eat." He turned and left, the door slamming behind him with a finality that left no room for argument. Outside, the wind carried the scent of dust and cattle dung. The sky stretched out in all directions, blistering blue, pitiless, cloudless. The same sky he had buried his wife under 2 years ago. In the solitude of his house, more a fortress than a home, Thorne lit a lantern and sat at the wooden desk that had not seen paper in weeks. Across from him, framed by glass worn thin from cleaning, was the photo of her, Clara. Her smile had been the only soft thing in his life. Since her death, the world had turned harder, louder, and unbearably quiet all at once. He opened the drawer and pulled out a sheet of paper, then dipped the nib of the pen into ink and began to write in blocky, practical strokes. Number 1, cook. Capable of preparing meals for 15 men. Must endure hard work, long hours, and hot kitchens. Room and board provided. Pay negotiable. Apply in person at McCrae Ranch, north of Yellow Horn. He paused, then underlined, in person. No need for letters, no need for foolish dreams. The posting said nothing about gender. He figured no woman would bother. That world had passed. A week later, the dust came in waves over the Texas Panhandle, rising off the scorched earth like ghosts of lost seasons. Heat shimmered across the prairie as the front gate creaked open on rusted hinges. The ranch dogs barked, alerting the men fixing fence rails nearby. Thorne stepped out of the barn, wiping sweat from his brow, when he saw her. A woman, small, slight, her sun-bleached bonnet barely holding back the wind from her face. She carried a bundled infant against her chest, wrapped in worn linen. Her dress was travel-stained, her boots cracked with age, and her eyes, steady, green as new grass, met his with a quiet force. "I saw your notice," she said before he could speak. "I can cook. I need a place to stay." Thorne blinked. "You walked here?" "I came by wagon, left it at the fork when the wheel gave out. It's just me and him now." She glanced at the baby. "Juniper Rose, that's my name." He studied her for a long time, jaw clenched. "I wasn't expecting a woman." "I figured," she said evenly, "but food's still food, and mouths don't care who made it." The men had gathered in loose knots behind him now, whispering, watching. One chuckled low, another muttered, "A babe and a babe." She did not flinch. "I do not ask for wages, not yet. Just shelter, food, and a place for my son to sleep." He could have said no. He should have. But something about the steadiness in her stance, despite the weight she bore, despite the burn on her cheeks and the dirt on her hem, stilled him. "You cook," he said finally, voice rough. "Tonight. If the men don't riot, you stay." She nodded. "That's fair." As she stepped through the threshold of McCrae Ranch, the child nestled against her chest, let out a soft, sleeping sigh. It was the sound of breath, and maybe, though Thorne could not know it yet, the sound of life coming back to a place long thought barren. He did not know her story, she did not know his, but something unseen passed between them in that heat-struck yard. He had posted for a cook. What arrived was something else entirely. The kitchen was a shack more than a structure, a lean-to built beside the main house, with smoke-blackened beams, an uneven stone hearth, and shelves bare as a winter field. Juniper stepped into it with her baby cradled against her chest and a quiet determination in her eyes. She set Sonny, still swaddled tight, into a wooden crate lined with folded flour sacks. The baby gurgled once, then drifted off, unfazed by the clatter of pots or the dry rasp of kindling being split. Juniper moved with purpose. She did not speak unless spoken to. She found flour older than sense and canned beans sealed with wax, and from those humble offerings she conjured something warm and filling. By sundown the men had gathered, suspicious, arms folded, heads cocked. Most of them expected disaster. They got cornbread thick with molasses, beans that tasted of smoke and spice, and thin slices of salted pork, crisped just right. One of them, a burly red-faced cowhand named Eli, took a bite and paused mid-chew. "What the hell is this?" he barked. Juniper looked up from where she was ladling stew into bowls. "Dinner." Eli scoffed, but kept chewing. "Tastes like I paid 5 cents for it in El Paso," he muttered. Then, without another word, he cleaned his plate to the last crumb. Thorne stood at the edge of the mess hall, arms folded, leaning against the doorframe. He had not spoken since she'd stepped into the kitchen, nor had he offered help, but he had watched. Closely. He watched as Juniper tied her hair back with a piece of frayed ribbon. Watched as she moved the baby's crate closer to the stove for warmth. Watched as she stirred with one hand while the other gently rocked her son. She never raised her voice, never asked for help, never let the tiredness show on her face. Later that night, the moon had risen cold and clear, and the men had long gone to their bunks. Thorne stepped out to check the paddock and saw the faint glow of fire behind the kitchen window. He went closer. Through the warped glass, he saw her. Juniper was barefoot, kneeling before the hearth, coaxing flame from the dying coals. Her baby was asleep, bundled tight on a pile of grain sacks nearby. The air outside was freezing, but inside she moved slowly, carefully, tucking her skirt beneath her knees as she added wood. The fire flared to life, licking the dark, casting orange light across her face. Then she did something that stopped him cold. She pulled a tin from her satchel, a small dented container wrapped in cloth. From it, she removed a few dried mint leaves and dropped them into a dented kettle with water. Moments later, the smell of peppermint drifted into the cold air. She poured it into a clay bowl, placed it on a tray, and turned to the door. Thorne stepped back just as she opened it. Their eyes met. "You've been coughing," she said softly. "Dry air, cold wind. I figured it couldn't hurt." She held out the tray like an offering. He didn't take it, not right away. Just looked at her, this strange, stubborn woman with a child and a quiet fire in her eyes. Then nodded once, sharp as a blade. She left the tray by the door and disappeared back inside. He picked it up only after the door closed. The tea was warm, bitter, soothing. He drank it all. The next morning, when Juniper entered the kitchen, the bowl was washed and placed neatly on the counter. She smiled, just barely. The fire had caught. The Texas wind kicked dust across the ranch yard as Thorne McCrae stepped out of the barn and caught sight of something unusual behind the cattle pens. He narrowed his eyes. There, in a narrow strip of earth, where nothing usually grew but scrub and old dung, were 3 small patches of green, not weeds, cultivated. He walked closer, slow and silent, and crouched beside the plants. He recognized mint, faintly aromatic even in the sun. Daisies, too, wild and tough, and another leaf he did not know, broad and dark-veined, like it belonged in the high mountains rather than here. A wooden marker, scrawled in delicate script, read, "Bone Set." He straightened and turned just as Juniper emerged from behind the tack shed, a basket in one hand, baby Sonny sleeping in the wrap against her front. She didn't flinch when she saw him, just paused, one brow raised. "They don't take up much room," she said. "I didn't say a word," Thorne replied. "You didn't have to." He studied her a long moment. "You plant them for tea?" "Tea, fever, rashes, upset bellies, coughs. You're not just a cook." "No," she said plainly, then walked past him, basket swinging, bare feet silent against the packed dirt. Later that week, near dusk, a boy no older than 13 came stumbling across the yard. His name was Caleb, one of the newer hands, eager to prove himself and too green to know what not to chew on while mending fence. He collapsed near the water trough, pale as bone, vomiting into the dirt. The men panicked. Thorne barked for someone to fetch the doctor in Yellowhorn, at least 2 hours away by fast horse. Juniper arrived seconds later. Still covered in flour, Sunny slung over her back in a shawl. She knelt beside the boy, placed her fingers to his pulse, then leaned close to smell his breath. "Cattle sage," she murmured. "He's eaten it." "Is he dying?" one of the men asked, voice cracking. "Not if I act now," she said. She handed the baby to Thorne without asking, and he took the child instinctively, stunned. She sprinted back to the kitchen, emerging with a jar of yellowish root, a cloth pouch, and a teacup. She boiled water on the stove as the sun sank lower, steam rising like prayers. She mashed the root with a spoon, added mint, then dripped the mixture into Caleb's mouth, drop by trembling drop. The men watched in silence, hats in hand. Some crossed themselves. One mumbled a prayer. 30 minutes later, Caleb's breathing steadied. By morning, he could sit up and eat broth. The word spread like wildfire. Juniper had saved him. By lunch, the men no longer called her that cook. She was Miss Juniper. One even tipped his hat and said, "Ma'am," like she was born into high station. That evening, Thorne stood by the porch, watching her sort herbs into small muslin bags, her baby cooing softly in a cradle nearby. The horizon was bathed in gold, the cattle lowing gently in the distance. He approached and leaned against the rail beside her. "You know what you're doing," he said. "I wouldn't still be here if I didn't." "You study medicine?" Juniper shook her head. "I studied survival." Thorne nodded. "Still, that boy'd be dead without you." She was quiet a moment. Then, "My grandmother was Cherokee, lived by the river past Arkansas Bend. She taught me about what heals and what harms. Said, the land gives both. You just have to know where to look." Thorne ran a hand along the porch post. "You always traveled with a baby?" Juniper smiled, tired but warm. "Only since he arrived. His name's Sonny. Came in the middle of a thunderstorm, screamed louder than the wind." "You running from someone?" She looked up, eyes hard. "Not anymore. Just looking for a place I don't have to run from." He didn't press further, just stood with her as the dusk wrapped around them like a soft blanket, her herbs rustling in their pouches, his hands in his pockets, the air quiet except for the occasional hum of night insects. And for the first time in a long time, Thorne McCrae did not feel the need to speak, nor the burden of filling silence. He just listened. Things changed quietly, like the slow shifting of seasons, when no one is watching. The men at McCrae Ranch stopped slamming doors and started wiping their boots before entering the cookhouse. They took off their hats around the baby. Someone fixed the loose porch board without being asked. And every evening, without fail, there was hot cornbread on the long table, sliced fresh and buttered with care, alongside a pot of herbal tea that soothed the day's grit from their throats. Thorne McCrae watched it all happen without comment. He noticed how Juniper moved through the house like she belonged there, though she never claimed any space as hers. How she always placed a cup of tea outside his door when his cough returned in the colder nights. How her laughter, rare but real, sounded like water running over rocks when one of the men said something foolish at dinner. He began rising earlier, not because he had to, but because he wanted to beat the sun and make repairs on the old kitchen shed before she woke. The door had been hanging crooked for years. Now it swung even. The cracked window frame now had fresh glass. He rebuilt the broken step with care, sanding the edge so she wouldn't trip when holding the baby. He never said a word about the work, but each board he nailed into place, each hinge he oiled, was a kind of apology and a thank you. One night, the wind howled harder than usual, dry and sharp like it had knives in it. Juniper couldn't sleep. Sonny stirred restlessly, then settled back into dreams with a little, She wrapped herself in a shawl and walked quietly through the house, past the quiet creak of sleeping wood, until she reached the barn. There, in the dim light of a single oil lamp, sat Thorn. He was alone, legs stretched long in front of him, an old guitar across his knees. The thing looked worn, weathered, like a driftwood cross. Its strings were dulled, the body dusty, the tuning pegs loose, but his hands moved over it like someone reacquainting with a lover thought lost. He didn't notice her at first. His head was bowed, fingers plucking a hesitant melody, rough, halting. The tune faltered, then steadied, something half-remembered and aching. Juniper stepped forward slowly, not wanting to startle him. When he looked up, surprised, she did not speak. Instead, she walked over and sat on the low crate beside him. Her shawl slipped slightly, revealing her collarbone, the curve of her neck in the soft light. She looked at the guitar. "I haven't heard one of those in a long time," she said quietly. Thorn swallowed. "Used to play every night, when Clara was alive. She said music made this place feel like a home, not a prison." He chuckled without humor. "Stopped touching it the day we buried her." Juniper's eyes softened. She reached out and placed her hand gently on the strings. "You know," she said, her voice low, "music isn't the sin. Living without it is." He looked at her, searching her face for mockery, for pity. There was none, just understanding. Outside, the wind screamed past the eaves, kicking dust across the yard. But inside that barn, all was still. He strummed once, and the note lingered. Juniper leaned her head against the wall behind them, eyes closed. Thorn didn't say another word. He simply played. And in the quiet between the notes, something buried long ago began to stir. It began like a whisper, just a few patches of brittle grass turning gray, then yellow, then curling to ash beneath the heat. Within days, the western pastures looked scorched, even though the sky had not dropped fire. Then came the coughing. The herd grew lethargic. Eyes dull, movement sluggish, some limped, others refused to eat. One morning a steer collapsed at the watering hole, foam crusting its mouth. Thorn ordered it shot and buried, hoping it was a one-off. It wasn't. By the end of the week, 6 more were dead, 30 were sick, and the grass, once the color of fresh-cut hay, now looked like grave shrouds spread across the fields. Thorn stood in the corral at dusk, his hat off, dust on his hands, staring at the horizon like it might offer an answer. It didn't. The doctor from Yellow Horn came, sniffed around, shrugged, and offered nothing but laudanum and guesswork. "This land is cursed," one of the cowhands muttered. Thorn didn't reply. His jaw was set tight enough to crack. That night, Juniper did not come to supper. Instead, she crouched by the fence line, running her fingers through a cow's manure, examining the color and texture with a focus that made the others uneasy. She called Thorn over quietly. "This isn't natural sickness," she said. "It's what they ate." "Poisoned?" he asked, voice tight. "Not exactly. There's a plant, spurgeweed. It looks like milkleaf when it sprouts. Cattle will eat it if the real grass dies off." She lifted the cow's lip. Inside, ulcers bloomed like rot. She rose. "I've seen this before. My grandmother treated a herd up in Cherokee land when I was 10. He didn't ask questions, just nodded once, and she disappeared into the woods with a basket and a knife. For 2 days, Juniper worked from sun-up to well past moonrise. She boiled bark down to a pulp. She crushed dried papaya leaves into powder. She mixed ash from mesquite logs into thick brown paste. She sang softly under her breath as she worked, half lullaby, half memory. Baby Sonny slept beside her, wrapped snug in a feed sack turned cradle. Then she fed the remedy, by hand, to every sick animal. One by one, with Thorn holding the heads still, she pressed the thick mixture between their teeth, massaging their throats to force it down. Some resisted, some spat, some vomited. But some, more than expected, stood up the next day with steadier legs. And by the end of the week, while news came in of entire herds dying in nearby counties, Thorn's ranch lost only a handful. 80% survived. The pasture was still dying, the wind still dry, But inside the barn, the cattle breathed easier. Juniper finished her rounds, collapsed onto the hay with her arms dusted in ash, sweat soaking through her bodice. Thorne stared at her from the stable doorway. She looked up. "It's not luck," she whispered. "It's knowledge." He didn't say anything. Didn't ask why she had risked her health, her strength, her sleep. Instead, he stepped forward and for the first time since Clara's funeral, wrapped his arms around another human being. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of embrace a man gives when he realizes the world is not done giving him things worth holding on to. Juniper didn't speak. She didn't have to. She just closed her eyes and let herself be held. By mid-August the rain still had not come, but something else had begun to bloom. Juniper, once only seen as the cook, was now called on when someone twisted an ankle, or came down with a fever, or burned a hand on the forge. She never turned anyone away. Her hands were steady, her voice sure. She taught simple remedies using the herbs she had grown behind the cattle pens: mint for nausea, yarrow for cuts, willow bark for headaches. Soon the men started asking questions: how to crush leaves, how long to boil a root, what tea helped sleep. She taught them, not as students, but as brothers learning to survive. Around the panhandle, ranchers whispered of a place up north where a woman could cure the sick and where even cattle stood taller after nearly dying. McRae Ranch, they said, the one where the baby's always smiling and the food don't taste like gunpowder. Drifters started showing up, dusty, bone-thin, desperate for work or water or rest. Thorne never said no. If Juniper trusted them, they stayed. If she didn't, they were gone by sundown. One day, a traveler arrived on foot. His beard was silver, his hat limp, and his coat more patch than fabric. He stayed only long enough to drink, to rest under the elm tree near the well. He saw Juniper walking with Sonny on her hip, singing softly as she picked mint from her garden. "You ain't just feedin' mouths, miss," the old man said, voice cracked like dry creek bed. "You're feedin' souls." She looked up, surprised. "That boy'll live long," he said, pointing to the baby, "'cause he believed he could heal the world around you." Then he tipped his hat and walked on. That night Thorne sat on the porch as the sun dipped low and pink behind the ridges. He held a mug of Juniper's tea in both hands, warm against his palms. He didn't say anything when she sat beside him. She didn't need to. The silence between them had become something shared, not empty. The next morning, Juniper woke to the sound of hammering. At first, she thought it was repairs, one of the men, mending fence or patching a loose shutter. But when she stepped outside, barefoot and blinking against the sun, she saw Thorne. He was building. With his sleeves rolled, arms marked with sweat and sawdust, he worked beside the kitchen wall, measuring lengths of pine. Baby Sonny sat nearby on a blanket, gurgling at birds. She watched for a while before speaking. "You lost another window?" "No," he said without looking up. "Storm damage?" "Nope." She waited. Thorne drove another nail, wiped his brow, and stood back. "It's for you," he said finally. "A room, separate entrance, next to the kitchen, bigger than the corner you sleep in." Her breath caught. "You didn't have to." "I know." She walked over, placed a hand against the new frame rising from the dirt. "You're not asking me to leave when spring ends?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "I'm asking you to plant things that'll need summer to grow." She smiled, soft and radiant, and didn't stop him when he reached for her hand. No one else in that wide Texas land knew what it meant. But between them, between the nails and the planks and the rising walls, it was louder than a wedding vow. They arrived in a fine-covered wagon, dressed not in dust and sweat like most ranchers, but in tailored vests and slick boots that had never touched manure. 4 of them, clean-shaven, their eyes sharp with calculation, and their smiles too smooth. Thorne met them at the gate. "We heard," the one in front said, tipping his hat, "that your ranch has got something special, more'n cattle." Thorne crossed his arms. "We sell beef, not stories." The man chuckled. "He heard you've got a lady here, one who heals, one who knows how to mix herbs, sweeten the tongue, calm a man's nerves. That right?" Thorne's face went still. "You here to buy cows or not?" The man stepped closer. "We own a fine establishment in Amarillo. Could use someone with her touch. We'd pay well. Room and board. She wouldn't be mistreated. In fact, some of our clientele are downright influential." "I see." Thorne nodded once, then punched the man square in the jaw. He hit the ground like a sack of feed. The others reached for their weapons, but Thorne already had his rifle up, cold and steady. "You get off my land," he growled, "before I forget I'm a peaceful man." They left. But they didn't forget. 3 nights later, the ranch was asleep beneath a silver moon, the air thick with cricket song. Juniper lay in her new room, Sonny asleep in the cradle beside her. She awoke to silence. Too much silence. Then the creak of a floorboard. She sat up, heart pounding. The cradle was empty. The window was open. She screamed. Thorne bolted from his bed. In under a minute they were on horseback, lantern swinging from his saddle horn, Juniper clutching her herb pouch, rage and terror burning brighter than any flame. They rode hard into the mesquite thickets, following hoof prints and broken branches. Thorne tracked like a wolf, no hesitation, no doubt. They found them by the creek bend. The same men hunched around a fire, laughing low, one holding the baby wrapped in his jacket. "Give him back," Juniper said, voice like a blade. The leader sneered. "You should have come with us, sweetheart. Now you'll come anyway, without your pride." Thorne fired once into the dirt. "Let the boy go." The man lunged instead, dragging Sonny toward the fire. Juniper moved without thought. She reached into her pouch and threw a handful of powder, burned bark and dried leaf ash straight into the man's eyes. He screamed, clutching his face, stumbling blindly. She grabbed Sonny, heart near bursting, and ran for Thorne. The rest backed away. Thorne held her close as she pressed the child to her chest, sobbing, rocking, whispering his name over and over. The men vanished into the night. The danger passed. Thorne said nothing. He only walked over, knelt beside them, and pressed a long, quiet kiss to Sonny's forehead. Then he placed the baby gently back into Juniper's trembling arms, and sat beside her until the sun began to rise. Evening came softly across the Texas panhandle, painting gold across the grassless fields. The great oak behind the house, older than the ranch, older maybe than memory, stood silent, its branches creaking in the wind like a voice remembering a song. Thorne McCrae sat beneath it, back against its weathered bark, cradling the old guitar in his lap. He hadn't played in weeks, not since the night in the barn when Juniper reminded him that music was a kind of prayer. Now his fingers moved slow, gentle, plucking out the tune Clara once wrote, a melody that never had words, but always had heart. The notes drifted across the yard, curling like smoke through the open windows of the kitchen, where Juniper was peeling apples. She stepped outside barefoot, quiet as dusk, and watched from the porch. She did not speak. He looked up at her once, then back to the strings, finishing the tune with a sigh that wasn't quite sadness. "I used to think that song belonged to the past," he said finally. "But it don't. Not anymore." Juniper stepped down and walked toward him, her shawl fluttering in the breeze, her hands stained with cinnamon and flour. She sat across from him in the dry grass. "I thought I'd never hear you play again," she said. He shrugged. "I thought I'd never want to." He set the guitar aside, the silence settling around them like a warm blanket. "Juniper," he said slowly, "I ain't asking this because I think I need a woman around the house. Lord knows you ain't just a woman around the house." She raised a brow. "I'm asking," he continued, "because I've known 2 kinds of silence in my life, the kind that kills and the kind that heals. And ever since you showed up with a baby on your hip and tea in your hands, it's been the healing kind." Her eyes glistened. "I'm not good with words. I ain't got no ring. But I don't want to live another sunrise without knowing you're just a room away." She laughed, quiet, tearful, trembling. "I came here begging for food," she whispered, "begging to be allowed to stay. Now you're asking me to stay forever." He leaned forward, resting his forehead to hers. "I'm asking you to be my home." She cupped his face, voice breaking. "There really is spring after the coldest March." They married 3 days later. There was no preacher, no church bells, no lace or silver or choir. Only the oak tree, its limbs high and wide like arms open to bless. The men strung up lanterns between fence posts. Eli roasted a hog. Caleb, fully recovered, played the harmonica with all the grace of a jackrabbit in a hailstorm, but no one minded. Baby Sonny wore a crown of wildflowers and giggled through the entire ceremony. Juniper wore a cloak the color of mint leaves, soft and clean. Her hair was braided with ribbon, and she walked, yes, walked, down the path between hay bales, barefoot, hand in hand with Thorn. When she reached him, she said only, "Took you long enough, Cowboy." He smiled like a man reborn. They exchanged vows without paper or ink. No one signed a thing, but everyone there knew it was real. In the weeks that followed, Thorn carved a new sign for the front gate. He sanded it smooth, burned the letters in by hand, and hung it beneath the old ranch name, the Cray and Rose. Ranch of Hope. Deliver goods for the wounded, hearts for the weary. The sun hung low when he finished, lighting the letters like fire. Inside the house, Juniper rocked Sonny, now walking short, proud steps across the floor, with chubby fists clutching anything he could grab. The boy babbled endlessly, the sound of a life too full to be quiet. Thorn stepped inside, wiped his hands on his jeans, and crossed to where Juniper stood. They watched the child together. Then he reached for her hand, linked their fingers, and whispered, "Spring came late, but it came." Outside, the wind swept soft across the yard, through the herb garden now blooming wild, over the fields beginning to heal. And beneath the great oak, where a guitar once sang to ghosts, now sat only silence. The good kind. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the dust, the hunger, the slow blooming hope between two broken souls, then you belong with us. Here at Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales not just of love, but of resilience, of women who carried healing in their hands, of men who learned to kneel not in defeat but in devotion, and of the kind of love that grows not in easy seasons but in hard-earned spring. So if you're ready for more dusty porches and whispered vows, more firelight kisses and redemptive rides into the unknown, subscribe now to Wild West Love Stories, where every love leaves a trail and every trail leads to the heart.